I agreed to go hunting with Grayson Mercer because saying no would have meant admitting I was still affected by him. At 24, I liked to believe I had matured past old confusions, past the quiet ache that used to follow me after every family gathering where he smiled too easily and stood too close. But when Grayson called and asked if I wanted to spend a weekend in the woods like we used to, his voice steady and familiar, I felt that old pull tighten in my chest. Grayson was 27 now, recently engaged to Lila Monroe. Everyone in the family adored her. She was kind, thoughtful, the kind of woman who brought homemade pie to Sunday dinners and remembered birthdays without reminders. When he mentioned the engagement on the phone, his tone had been measured, almost rehearsed, as if he were reading from a script he'd practiced. I congratulated him, of course. I even meant it, at least partly, but there are truths that sit underneath polite words that we drove out before sunrise in Grayson's truck, the highway slowly giving way to long stretches of forest. The world beyond the windshield looked untouched and distant, the trees swallowing the signal on our phones mile by mile. He talked about wedding venues and guest lists while I watched the light crawl over the dashboard. Every so often, he'd glance at me, as if checking whether I was still there. "Lila wants something simple," Grayson said, tapping the steering wheel. "Outdoor ceremony. Late summer." "That sounds like you," I replied, forcing a small smile. "You always liked open spaces." He laughed softly. "Yeah. Guess I did." The air between us carried something unspoken. We hadn't spent time alone like this in years, not since we were teenagers slipping away from noisy houses to sit by the creek behind his parents' place. Back then, closeness had felt innocent. Or maybe we'd just been better at pretending. By the time we reached the clearing where we planned to camp, the sky had turned a pale gray. The forest was quiet except for the wind moving through the branches. Grayson cut the engine, and for a moment, neither of us opened the doors. The silence felt heavier than the drive. He cleared his throat. "Feels good to get away." "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure from what. That we worked side by side setting up the tent and unloading supplies. Our movements were familiar, almost synchronized, as if muscle memory had been waiting for this reunion. When he handed me a bundle of stakes, our fingers brushed. It was brief, accidental by all appearances, but he didn't pull away immediately. I felt the pause like a spark against dry wood. Grayson stepped back first. "You still seeing anyone?" he asked, focusing intently on adjusting a rope that didn't need adjusting. "No," I answered. It was easier than explaining the string of half-hearted dates that never went anywhere because I kept comparing strangers to him. "Just work." He nodded slowly. "That's probably smart." "Smart? Keeping things simple." I almost laughed at that. His life was anything but simple now. An engagement ring sat in the glove compartment of his truck, ready to be resized. A future had been outlined for him in neat, predictable lines. Yet here we were, miles from town, pretending this was just about deer season. That we spent the afternoon walking through the woods, rifles slung over our shoulders, talking about everything except what mattered. He asked about my job at the hardware store, about whether I planned to move out of our hometown someday. I asked about Lila's family, about how wedding planning was going. Every answer felt carefully trimmed, like we were editing ourselves in real time. As the sun began to sink, clouds gathered without warning. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. "That doesn't look good," I said, glancing at the darkening sky. Grayson followed my gaze. "We should head back." The storm hit faster than either of us expected. By the time we reached the campsite, rain was falling in heavy sheets, drenching the clearing and turning the ground slick. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to rattle the metal supplies we'd left out. We scrambled to secure what we could and dove into the tent just as the downpour intensified. Inside, the space felt smaller than it had earlier. The rain drummed against the fabric in relentless rhythm, sealing us into a world defined by shadows and the faint glow of a battery lantern. Our phones had already lost service. The outside world might as well have disappeared. Grayson ran a hand through his damp hair and let out a breath. "Guess we're staying put tonight." "Looks that way." The storm gave us no choice but to sit across from each other, knees nearly touching, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and nylon. Conversation came slower now, less guarded that he stared at the lantern for a long moment before speaking. Do you ever feel like you're moving towards something because everyone expects you to? The question hung between us, heavier than the thunder. Sometimes, I said carefully. Why? Grayson hesitated, jaw tightening. I love Lila, he began, then stopped, as if testing the words. She's good to me. She deserves certainty. And you're not certain? I asked that he met my eyes then, really looked at me, and the vulnerability there unsettled me more than the storm. I thought I was, he said quietly. But lately, I keep thinking about old things. Old versions of myself. A memory flickered in my mind, two teenage boys sitting too close by a creek, the space between them charged with questions neither dared to voice. We all change, I replied, though my pulse had started to race. Do we? Grayson asked. Or do we just get better at hiding parts of ourselves? The rain softened slightly, but inside the tent, the tension sharpened. He shifted closer, our knees brushing now without pretense of accident. I could feel the warmth of him through damp fabric, steady and undeniable. There were things I never figured out, he continued, voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear. Back then, I thought if I ignored them, they'd disappear. And did they? My throat felt dry that he shook his head once. No, silence pressed in, charged and fragile. The lantern flickered as thunder rolled farther away, leaving only the sound of rain and our uneven breathing. Ethan, he said, my name almost a question that I looked at him, knowing that whatever he said next would shift something fundamental between us. His hand moved, slow and deliberate this time, until it rested over mine. There was nothing accidental about it, the contact was steady, intentional, and far more intimate than any words we'd exchanged. That I in that suspended moment, with the storm fading and the forest holding its breath, I realized this trip had never really been about hunting, and as Grayson's fingers tightened slightly around mine, I understood that whatever we did next would not be something either of us could take back. Grayson didn't pull his hand away, the storm had weakened to a distant murmur, but inside the tent the air felt charged, as if lightning had settled between us instead of striking the trees outside. His fingers remained laced with mine, warm and deliberate, not testing but deciding. I shouldn't have done that, Grayson said quietly, though he made no effort to move. Then why did you? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt that he exhaled, eyes fixed on our joined hands. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't feel anything. The confession didn't feel dramatic. It felt exhausted. For years, Grayson had been the confident one, the athlete, the dependable son, the man who knew where he was headed. Hearing uncertainty in his voice unsettled me more than the touch itself. It stripped away the version of him everyone else believed in. What do you feel? I asked. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might retreat behind humor or silence. Instead, he looked at me with a vulnerability I had only glimpsed once before, long ago by the creek when we were 16 and didn't yet have language for what passed between us. I feel like I built a life that looks right from the outside, he said slowly. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that was enough. And it's not. I pressed. Grayson's grip on my hand shifted, thumb brushing across my knuckles in an absent, grounding motion. It's safe, he admitted. Lila is safe. Loving her is easy. The word easy lingered, but... I asked. But when I'm with you, it's not easy, he said. It never was. The honesty in that sentence stole the air from my lungs. Emotional lines had already been crossed, we both knew it. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was recognition. You're engaged, I reminded him, though the reminder felt hollow. I know. His voice sharpened, not in anger but in frustration. I know that. I see her face every time I close my eyes. She trusts me. The weight of Lila Monroe entered the tent then, not as a villain but as a reality. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was planning a wedding, choosing flowers, believing in a future that was quietly unraveling miles away in a rain-soaked clearing. Guilt settled between us, heavy and unavoidable. Then why are you here? I asked. Grayson leaned back slightly, though his hand remained in mine. Because I needed to know if this was just nostalgia. If I imagined what I felt back then. He swallowed. I didn't imagine it. Neither had I. The years we'd spent orbiting each other suddenly felt intentional, as if we'd both been careful not to drift too far but never brave enough to collide. Family gatherings, holidays, quick hugs that lasted a second too long, all of it rearranged itself into something undeniable. I thought getting engaged would silence it, Grayson admitted. I thought if I committed to the right life, the other part of me would disappear. And did it? I asked softly. He gave a humorless smile. No. It just got louder. The lantern's glow cast sharp shadows across his face, outlining the tension in his expression. This wasn't reckless desire. It was a man confronting the fracture between who he was and who he had promised to be. I don't want to hurt her, he said. Then don't, I replied, though my chest tightened as I said it. Grayson's eyes searched mine. It's not that simple. It never was. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain tapered off completely, leaving only the faint drip from tree branches outside. The world beyond the tent felt distant, irrelevant. All that existed was the space between our faces, close enough now that I could see the uncertainty in his expression. I need you to tell me something, he said. What? If I walk away from this, he began carefully, if I marry her and bury this part of me, will you be okay? The question wasn't selfish. It was desperate. I could have lied. I could have given him an answer that made everything easier. Instead, I chose honesty, because we had already crossed too many lines to retreat into politeness. No, I said, the word hung there, fragile and final. Grayson closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the impact. When he opened them again, something had shifted, less fear, more resolve. I don't know what my life looks like if I don't marry her, he admitted. My family will ask questions. People will talk. They always do, I said quietly, but I know what my life looks like if I keep lying, he continued. And I'm not sure I can live inside that. His hand finally left mine, but only to cup my face, hesitant at first, as if giving me time to object. I didn't. The kiss, when it came, wasn't rushed. It was careful, almost reverent, built on years of silence rather than impulse. There was no urgency beyond the need to confirm what we already understood. It felt less like starting something and more like acknowledging something that had always existed. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. We stayed like that, breathing the same air, suspended between relief and consequence. This changes everything, I whispered. I know, he replied. Reality returned in layers. Lila's smile. A ring in a glove compartment. Invitations not yet mailed. Families who believed in a version of Grayson that no longer felt whole. He shifted away first this time, sitting back against the tent wall. The distance between us felt deliberate, necessary. I can't pretend this didn't happen, he said. But I also can't go back tomorrow and act like nothing's different. What are you going to do? I asked. Grayson stared at the tent ceiling, where faint drops of water still clung to the fabric. I need to talk to her, he said finally. Not about you. Not yet. But about me. The distinction mattered. You'd risk everything? I asked. He gave a slow nod. If I don't, I lose myself anyway. The simplicity of that truth settled over us. Infidelity wasn't just an act, it was a symptom of something unresolved. And while what happened between us could be called betrayal, it had also forced a confrontation neither of us could avoid any longer. We didn't touch again that night. We lay on opposite sides of the tent, separated by inches and years of restraint finally acknowledged. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the quiet awareness that morning would demand action. When dawn filtered through the thin fabric, the forest looked unchanged, washed clean by the storm. Grayson sat up first, running a hand over his face as if bracing himself. Neither of us spoke while we packed at the edge of the clearing. Before climbing into the truck, he paused. The uncertainty from the night before was still there, but it was steadier now, anchored by decision rather than fear. I don't know what happens next, he said. Neither do I admitted. He held my gaze a second longer than necessary, not with hesitation this time but with acknowledgement. Whatever came after this, confessions, broken plans, difficult conversations, it would be built on truth rather than avoidance. As we drove back toward town, signal bars slowly reappearing on our phones, I realized the storm had done more than trap us overnight. That IT had stripped away the version of Grayson Mercer who lived for appearances, and as his phone lit up with missed calls from Lila Monroe, I understood that the real reckoning was no longer waiting in the woods. That IT was waiting at home.